Hi, this is Mr. Armstrong with Mr. Smith and Mr. Engler's American History class. This is a screencast presentation on Watergate, Richard Nixon's downfall. Your learning target is I will be able to explain why the White House tapes were such valuable evidence in a Watergate scandal. In Richard Nixon's White House, he believed that he had supreme authority, and he tried to expand his powers. Some examples are he tried to reduce funding for federal programs, and with the bombing in Cambodia and Laos. Also, his president's men, they thought they were above the law, including people such as the White House Chief of Staff H.R. Haldeman, Chief Domestic Officer John Ehrlichman, and Nixon's Attorney General John Mitchell. These men thought that they could just cover up the Watergate scandal. The drive towards re-election. The Watergate complex was the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee. This is actually a picture of what it looks like in downtown Washington, D.C. In June of 1972, a Watergate security guard called the police and 5 men were arrested. All 5 of these men were tied to the committee to re-elect the president, the CRP, and with that, questions arose about their motives. There was a link to money that was given to the burglars and the finance committee of the CRP. So that's when there was questions about who sent them there and why they were there. The burglars were there to place wiretaps on the phones, and they were trying to photograph documents of the Democratic Party, their plans for election. This also kind of was the start of questioning for higher echelon government officials. And it was reported that these guys were given $450,000 as hush money. So at this point, this is when the cover-up began and the whole process started. There was lots of documents that were incriminating that were shredded. President Nixon himself tried to have the CIA impede on the FBI investigation. He tried to say that the investigation was a matter of national security. And at the time, there was very little public attention, and Nixon was reelected very easily in 1972. At that point, there was just a couple guys reporting from the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. And these guys were determined to uncover information about this scandal. Excuse me. They relied very heavily on a anonymous inside source for information. That was somebody that was working in the Justice Department, and their reporting indicated people from the Justice Department, FBI, CIA, and the White House with Nixon were all implicated in this. So when these reports started coming out, this is when the Senate got involved, and they began to investigate the Watergate scandal. The presiding judge, Judge John Sirica, one of the key burglars in the Watergate burglary, actually said he lied, and he actually indicated that Nixon administration was part of this process, and President Nixon went on to national TV and denied the cover-up. And at this time, many of the key members of Nixon's staff were fired or they resigned on their own. The Senate called for administration members to testify on national TV, which was led by the Special Committee of Senate, which was chaired by James Irvin. The former White House counsel John Dean and White House aide Alexander Butterfield actually had very incriminating testimony in this. Dean actually had told them that Nixon was involved, that they had conversations about the cover-up, and Alexander Butterfield actually had probably the largest influence on this investigation when he claimed that Nixon had taped all of his White House conversations. So on July 16, 1973, on live television, Butterfield's revelation of the taping system transformed the Watergate investigation. He was asked on national TV and he admitted that, yes, President Nixon had, in fact, recorded all of his conversations at the time. So after this stunning testimony from Butterfield came the Saturday Night Massacre, and this became a year-long battle for the Nixon tapes, led by Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox. He took the president of the court in October of 1973. President Nixon actually refused, citing that he had executive privilege, which once again shows that he was trying to take his power too far. And the, quote, Saturday Night Massacre was when President Nixon demanded that Cox be fired, and the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General refused and were dismissed. This is when Nixon's famous quote, "I am not a crook," occurred. And finally, after Nixon's demands, the Solicitor General Robert Bork finally fired Cox, but his replacement was also determined to get the tapes. At this time, the House Judiciary Committee began discussing the possibility of impeachment for Nixon. The fall of a president. In March of 1974, a grand jury indicts 7 former Nixon aides, known as the Watergate 7. These were some of the men involved: Ehrlichman, Dean, Haldeman, previously mentioned. And the Watergate 7 included Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Mitchell, Charles Colson, Gordon C. Strachan, Robert Mardian, and Kenneth Parkinson. And then in April of 1974, President Nixon announces the release of his edited transcripts. The investigators, though, were not okay with just edited version. They wanted the full unedited version. And then in August, at the order of the Supreme Court, Nixon is forced to release the full tapes, but there is an 18.5-minute gap in there that is very questionable. Even still, these tapes were very detrimental to Nixon's case and what he'd been telling the public. The tapes talked about, you could hear him talking about having to pay the Watergate burglars, and him knowing about the cover-up and actually agreeing to the plan. After that occurred, the House Committee, voted 27-11 to recommend impeachment for Nixon on accounts of obstruction of justice, the abuse of power, and contempt of Congress when he refused to turn in his tapes. So those are some very powerful allegations to our president at the time. What an impeachment is, if you've never heard of impeachment, it's basically a formal charge against a government official for any kind of crime that they may have committed while in office, and that can also include removal from that office. So before the impeachment process could fully take place, and it's almost a guarantee that Nixon would have been impeached at the time, he decided in his best interest to resign. This was on a nationally televised address from the Oval Office in August of 1974. This document over here actually is his actual resignation letter. Richard Nixon is actually the only U.S. president to ever resign from the position. And as part of his speech that night, I wanted to read a little bit from it and talk about why he actually decided to resign rather than to fight the accusations. It states, "To continue to fight through the months ahead for my personal vindication would almost totally absorb the time and attention of both the President and the Congress in a period when our entire focus should be on the great issues of peace abroad and prosperity without inflation at home. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office." Ironically, Richard Nixon's original vice president, Spiro Agnew, had already resigned due to his own scandal, so Gerald Ford stepped in as president at this time. And very soon after Nixon left office, new President Ford issued him a full pardon, which actually prevented him from being prosecuted for any crimes. This was very unpopular at the time. People were not happy with what they saw from Richard Nixon, and they wanted to see him punished, and Gerald Ford lost a lot of his support right away when he issued Nixon the pardon. And that actually was a big reason that he lost the election very soon after to Jimmy Carter. The effects of Watergate. This is the type of large-scale scandal that is the example used in any kind of similar situation today. 25 members of Nixon's administration were convicted and went to prison. This also caused the American public to develop even more cynicism about public officials. They had just, had issues with Vietnam, and then Watergate happened immediately after, and that kind of cynicism and skepticism definitely exists today. It kind of started at this time. It also led to Congress passing more legislation for campaign financing. And in addition, Congress amended the Freedom of Information Act in 1974. Some pictures from this moment in time, the Resignation newspaper, and this is actually the famous picture from when Richard Nixon got onto the Air Force One and left his presidency. Okay, that pretty much covers it. I hope you were able to take some valuable information from this, and thank you for listening.